Welcome to Anti-Fiction. This is a weekly nonfiction podcast where each week I, Christian Yates, choose a theme, and then I invite two guest hosts to come and share stories based on that theme. My guest hosts this week are Hush Chat podcast co-host Alex Stern.
Howdy.
And lover of groupies, Mike Yates.
True story.
So our topic this week is con artists. And so we've all brought stories based around some kind of con artist. Hopefully. You guys came for the right episode.
Yeah, I consider mine a con artist for sure.
Okay, good.
We need to go to the library real quick. No, okay.
This wasn't the... oh, man, I thought I was on a different episode.
I thought we were doing aliens.
So I want to give a shout out real quick to our listeners, because we've had like an amazingly decent turnout for this podcast over the last few weeks. And so I wanted to, say hello. We've had listeners in countries outside of the United States too, which is awesome because I literally know no one outside of the United States, which means that you guys are just listening because you kind of like us, which is kind of cool.
Kind of weird.
A little weird.
Cool.
But hello to all of our friends in Canada, Japan, Ireland, the UK, France, and the Netherlands, and Australia. We had one in Australia.
Solid.
Listening.
That's
right?
awesome. It's better than our podcast. We only have us boring in-states normies.
They're probably just listening so that way they can hear us butcher their cities' names. They're like, that's not where that city's... it's not even on the coast, you idiot.
Or all those Norwegian names that I probably got very wrong.
I'm pretty sure that's
part
why
of the experience.
We have no Norwegian listeners.
That's why...
and I'm pretty sure that's why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's 100% why.
But I wanted to say thank you to everybody listening. Make sure you're leaving us like a review or a rating, whatever system your streaming service of choice uses. Check us out on Twitter and Instagram at AntiFictionCast, and we also have a Facebook page. You can like us on Facebook as well. But we'll get right into the stories now. So I decided to tell the story of Frank Abagnale Jr. Are you guys familiar with Frank Abagnale?
Heard the name.
I think so.
In 2002, the movie Steven Spielberg put out Catch Me If You Can.
Okay,
with
yeah.
Leonardo
Okay,
DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks' character in the movie is fictional, but he's based on the real guy. But Leonardo DiCaprio played Frank Abagnale Jr., and the movie's fantastic. I definitely give it 2 thumbs up, but some of it is sensationalized, but the real story is just as crazy.
Welcome to the movie review portion of the podcast.
The information that I got for this, I literally there was one article that was written about Frank Abagnale Jr. that I got almost all of my information from, and that is a shout out thank you to Rachel Bell, the author of Skyway Man, the story of Frank Abagnale Jr. So Frank Abagnale Jr. was born on April 27th, 1948. And he started conning and swindling at the ripe old age of 15. His first victim was his father. His dad had bought him a 52 Ford, and it was in a gas credit card. So he gave these both to Frank and was like, listen, Junior, you got to get to your job. You got to learn some responsibility. So here's a car and a credit card. But Frank had other ideas in mind, and so he decided that in order to secure a little bit of extra money for dates, because his job didn't pay quite as well as he would like, so he decided that in order to get some more date money, what he would do is take the credit card and go to the gas station, buy car accessory items, charge them to the credit card, then return the items for cash. and sometimes he would cut in the attendant in on the deal. So he would charge it,
what a charitable guy.
return it, and be like, hey, here's a little something for your trouble. Appreciate you.
Nice.
Right? He did this a lot, and it seemed like a win-win situation until Frank Sr. got stuck with the credit card bill for $3,400. I did the math with an inflation calculator. This was 1964, 63, 64. He was 15 at the time. I did the math on an inflation calculator. $3,400 then is equivalent to $28,000 now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of Hondos.
Yeah, that's a chunk of change.
It's a lot of car accessories.
So,
like, what does it mean by car accessories? Like air freshener,
tires, batteries, just anything that he could buy with the credit card and then exchange for cash. It would be all kinds of stuff. He'd go for the higher priced items, the tires,
that would
batteries,
be
and things
more
like that. But
lucrative for sure.
Yeah. So at 16, Frank decided to set out on his own, and he moved to New York City and got a job at a stationery firm where he was earning $1.50 an hour, which seems like bullshit money now, but I guess that it's a livable wage in 1964. So he quickly realized that he'd need to make more than this if he wanted to live the lifestyle that he wanted to live. So he decided to start making some adjustments. First, he altered his driver's license to make himself 10 years older, thinking that like his advanced age then would be more appealing and get him more money. And then he exaggerated his education to further increase his wages. But the increases that these changes yielded only provided the bare minimum of comfort, and his aspirations were still higher. So he quit his job and began writing bad checks, resulting in his checking account being overdrawn by thousands of dollars. Thousands of 1964 dollars.
Damn, okay.
Yeah. And he would set up different accounts at different banks. And then, like, if one bank was like, okay, well, you have to pay us for the amount that your account is overdrawn, he'd just be like, peace out, and go start a new account at a different bank. And since nobody talked to each other, evidently, in 1964...
this is pre-Wi-Fi, I remember that.
It was pre-Wi-Fi, that's true. It was all pencil and paper. So he would just go to a different bank and do the same thing until they demand a payment, and then he would go to a different bank. So he knew that the police would be on to him soon, so he decided to move away and change his name. And after seeing airline pilots and stewardesses outside the Commodore Hotel, he realized what he needed to do. He got a hold of a pilot's uniform. If he could get a hold of a pilot's uniform, he could cash bad checks wherever he wanted, because pilots were respected professionals, and so nobody would look twice at a pilot who's writing a check. They'd be like, oh, he's a pilot. Of course it's going to clear. It's going to be fine. So he decided he needed to he needed to become a pilot. So he contacted Pan Am Airlines corporate headquarters, and he explained that the hotel he was staying in had lost his uniform. And he was instructed to visit a company that specialized in Pan Am's uniforms, which he promptly did. He was fitted for the uniform and charged it to a fictional employee number while he was filling out the paperwork. Just made up an employee number, wrote it down, and that's who they charged it to.
Fucking legend.
Yeah, Joe Smith, whatever.
Flawless execution.
Right. So now he needed a Pan Am pass card. So he got out the yellow pages and found the company that produced Pan Am's pass cards and set up an interview under the guise that he represented a company interested in buying new IDs. He was shown a catalog containing sample passes, and when he noticed one that looked similar to Pan Am's, he told the salesman that he wanted to take back with him a completed pass, including his name and photo, and in order to show his colleagues what a finished product would look like. And the salesman did it. The salesman produced...
Speech level 100.
Right? The salesman produced a pass card almost identical to Pan Am's, but it didn't have the Pan Am logo. So what he did was he bought a model Pan Am plane and took the logo from the model kit and put it on the pass card.
That is absolutely genius.
Like, it genuinely
really
sounds like
is.
he's getting away with the bare minimum effort.
It does,
like,
doesn't
but
it?
it worked anyways.
He's just writing bad checks. The banks are like,
It's like, we don't
want
know
our
what's
money.
going on. This is weird.
So he put the logo from the model kit onto the pass card, and now all he needed to become a legitimate quote-unquote pilot, all he needed now was a Federal Aviation Administration license, which was required by every pilot, and he needed knowledge of the airline business, so that way if somebody talked to him, he could bullshit his way through a conversation with them. So he read library books and set up interviews with airline executives and pilots in order to learn the terminology. And he falsified his FAA license under the name Frank Williams by ordering a plaque, which he took to a printer, downsized, and laminated.
I feel like it almost would have been easier to just become an actual pilot at this point.
Let me tell you that we're going to get into some stuff where you're like, how in the world?
How did this work?
Right?
I have a feeling that we say that now, but like he's obviously the reason why that wouldn't work now.
We are about to get into things where Frank Abagnale Jr. is like, how did that work? So he got his FAA license, and now he was all set. Between the ages of 16 and 18, Pan Am estimates that Frank Abagnale Jr. flew over 1 million miles on more than 250 flights. He stayed in hotels for free, and his expenses were billed to Pan Am. I should point out, he did not fly the plane himself. He did, it's called deadheading. Mm-hmm. So airline staff fly back to wherever they need to get to for free. They get to just ride in the plane. Like if they land in Miami and that's the end of their shift, but they live in Buffalo, then they got to get back to Buffalo. Mm-hmm. So the company just sends them, right? So that's what he did. But he flew 1 million miles that way, all over the country, all over the world. At one, but all the pilots and stewardesses were friendly with him. Like, oh, look, a pilot. That's cool.
We don't have those here.
We don't have those here. But at one point, they were flying like 13,000 miles, right, was their altitude. And like the pilot was like, do you want to take over the wheel for a second? Like, and Frank's like, sure. Because if he didn't, then it was suspicious. I'm like, why don't you just say, man, I've been flying all day. I'm good. You got this. Like, no, but he flew very temporarily a flight with like 140 passengers' lives in his hands, and it freaked him the hell out. He said so.
He was responsible for a lot of fun, but he could have been responsible for a lot of death that day.
Yes, that'll come back up too. So. With his pilot scam a success, Frank was now cashing bad checks in 26 countries. He never moved past cashing bad checks. But now he's doing it internationally.
I have a feeling that that's foreshadowing that's going to be his downfall.
Well, yeah. So he was cashing bad checks in 26 countries, opening more and more accounts under assumed names, and in order to throw off suspicion to himself, he would sometimes open the account with a large cash deposit and then just keep it there for safekeeping. He would have safe boxes all over the world with cash hidden inside of them, all from his check schemes. So here are some of the things that he did with his check cashing schemes. And this is honest to God so fucking brilliant. He would alter the check numbers to reroute and delay checks. So, check numbers at this point, it's a little bit different now, but so check numbers
and
at this point.
Because you work for a bank.
Yes.
So the inside scoop, you hear here first.
So he would alter the check numbers in order to reroute the check because they would have to send the check to the issuing bank. So he would he would alter the check numbers so that way the bank that they had to reroute it to was as far away as possible, so it would take a long time to go, and then so that way he could cash multiple checks at a certain bank, like much as he wanted, and then just fuck off. And then by the time the bank was like, oh hey, this check was bad, this was returned, like now they're thousands of dollars, like, and he's just in the wind. So he had safe boxes all across the country and the world. He started making near perfect copies of payroll checks. He magnetically printed his account number onto blank deposit slips and then slid them into the stack of real deposit slips, so that way when bank customers came in to make a deposit and they grab one of his deposit slips, the money would go to his account instead of their account.
Whoa.
What a legend. Holy shit.
Right? So at one point, Frank was intercepted by police when a flight he was on landed in Dade County, Florida. He maintained that he was Frank Williams, not Frank Abagnale Jr., and gave them the names of several people who they could call to confirm his identity, because at this point he had made friends and acquaintances with a bunch of people in the airline industry. He's like, no, I'm pilot Frank Williams. Ask any of these people. And then they would call those people, and the people would say, oh yeah, no, I know Frank. Oh yeah, he's a pilot. He's from here. Like, they would confirm his false identity. Because that's who they believed he was. So after this brief encounter with the law, Frank decided to lay low, and he took up residence at a residential community in Atlanta. Here, he posed as a pediatrician, taking a break from his duties. And then he met an actual doctor who invited him to visit the hospital where he worked. Frank visited numerous times, and he eventually gained access to the medical library, where he learned all he could about his new role as a pediatrician. His pleasantness with hospital staff and obvious eagerness drew the attention of the hospital administrator, who offered him a temporary position supervising medical interns until they could find a permanent candidate.
Jesus Christ. That's like speech level 200 now.
Frank was appointed as resident supervisor and given authorization to practice medicine in the state of Georgia. He held this position.
Oh my God.
He held this position for 11 months. Almost a year. He was practicing medicine for a year. As supervisor, he would leave details to the interns. So he had a very hands-off approach. So the interns would always be very eager to impress him, so they would want to do the menial tasks. Somebody's, like somebody needs a trach. He's like, intern, what do we do? And the intern goes, I got it, boss. And like jumps in there and like does the tracheotomy.
Man.
Right? This happened for 11 months.
The charisma on this man.
Yeah. So he basically just managed the situation. He made sure that like if somebody was like, oh, I don't know what to do, he'd be like, all right, well, Billy, you step in, like somebody else take over. He resigned.
Oh my God.
He resigned from this position shortly after a child was brought into the ER for a leg injury, and that's when he realized that he was responsible for people's lives. So he resigned.
Only at that point.
It was at that point, yes.
Do you concur, Doctor?
After his resignation, he left Georgia and headed to Louisiana, where he started dating a stewardess that he'd met several years prior while flying all over the country, disguised as a Pan Am pilot. So Frank led her to believe that not only was he a pilot, but that he also had a Harvard law degree. Although he had never practiced. So he got the degree, but like,
then never became a lawyer.
He never never passed any bar and like never practiced law. He got this degree and then was like, fuck it, I want to be a pilot.
Did it for shits and giggles.
Right.
Yeah. I was just bored.
I did
I figured I'd take
my dad was
4
lawyer,
years, 8 years of law school. Just because I had nothing better to do at the time.
So His stewardess girlfriend introduced him to a lawyer who worked at the state DA office. The lawyer told Frank that there was a position open at the Attorney General's office that he should pursue. He would only need to take his university transcripts to the examiner's office and apply for the Louisiana bar. Frank forged transcripts after researching the types of classes offered at Harvard Law and began studying law books in preparation for the bar exam. He flunked. But at the time, Louisiana allowed you to take the bar as many times as you needed, so he tried again, and he flunked again. The third try, however, he passed and received a license to practice law at the age of 19.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He was subsequently hired to the Attorney General's office.
Oh, good God.
As a legal assistant. And he described the position as basically a glorified coffee boy. But
whenever assistant isn't your title, but
right.
It's at the end of the title. That's
assistant to the regional manager. Yeah, that's what he was. So he was hired as a legal assistant at $13,000 a year. I did the inflation calculator again. That is $98,000.
That's a lot of money to get coffee.
That is a lot. That is quite a comfortable salary.
I can see why people do it now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he worked there for 8 months until another lawyer, who was an actual Harvard alumni, tried to connect with him and, be friendly with him and, talk about what his favorite part of Harvard was and, go whatever Harvard's mascot is and all of that. And Frank began to feel uneasy, so he bounced. He just left the job. And he fell back into his pilot persona. From here, Frank moved to Utah, where he began teaching at Brigham Young University after impressing the dean with his charm and falsified teaching history. The position was temporary, but Frank enjoyed teaching, and he was revered by his students. Again, he is 19. He is younger than most of his students. He was let go after the summer semester because the position was only temporary. But he left with an invitation by the dean to return when a permanent position opened up. Brigham Young University, by the way, denies that ever happened. And I'm like, of course you would. Because if that happened, that is the worst thing, PR-wise.
To your school.
So from here, Frank moved to California, where he went back to doing what he did best, writing bad checks. In California,
old habits die hard.
Old faithful.
Right, yeah. Old faithful. So in California, he met a young stewardess, and the two fell in love. They were beginning to discuss marriage. Frank decided to come clean about his true identity and his criminal history, and to his surprise, she informed the police and FBI about his whereabouts.
Oh. You think you know a person. They just turn you in like that.
Did not expect that to happen. That is not what he thought was going to. Oh, that's fine. I love you anyway. No. You're a check forger.
A man can dream, though.
I think we should admire his honesty, though, with her.
I respect him for that.
He told the truth.
He was like, listen, I love you. We're talking about marriage. I need to be honest about who I really am. Who I am as a liar and a thief. But I only lie about being a thief.
And I don't do that anymore.
Steal?
Lie.
Shout out to Ocean's 11.
Solid reference.
George Clooney is not sponsoring this podcast.
But we're trying to get him to.
We're trying to get him to. I'm in touch with his agent. I'm not no. So after he flees California, because the police are on to him now, Frank is picked up by police at a Boston airport while waiting on a departing flight. They charge him with vagrancy until they had enough evidence to prove that he was, in fact, Frank Abagnale Jr. So they just charge him with being homeless, it sounds like, basically, until they can put together a case. But they didn't get a chance before he was released on bail. After he was released...
Did he write them a check?
What's that?
Did he write them a check?
I hope so. I really hope so.
He got on bail on a bad check.
Right.
How
Who
hilarious
posted
would that
his
be?
bail? I couldn't find that out. I don't know who posted his bail. Listeners, if you are Frank Abagnale Jr. or you know him, ask him who posted his frickin' bail. Because I could not figure that out.
Because these are the questions. These are the questions we want answered.
You can't post your own bail. You're in custody.
Not how did you manage to run a hospital? How did you get out of jail on bail?
This is what's going to keep me up at night.
Right. So after he's released on bail, he goes to a costume shop and buys a security guard's uniform. And then he stands outside a bank branch at the very airport he was just arrested in, placing a sign over the night depository that read, "Night deposit vault out of order. Please make deposits with security officer."
No fucking way.
Please tell me this worked.
So Frank set up his own container, and at least 35 people dropped bags or envelopes into
Oh
it.
my God.
He later stated that he could not believe this worked because how can a Dropbox be out of service? The bag became so heavy that he could barely lift it into his car, so 2 state troopers helped him lift it.
Honestly, I truly respect this man.
This man, this is like...
I have no issue with this criminal
really
history.
Nails home the part. You'll never know if you don't try. Like...
So in this particular scam, he made off with $60,000 cash.
That's $60,000 for like 4 hours of work. What's that in
I
2018
did not do
money?
the inflation calculator on that.
A lot.
That's the
A
one
lot.
that I forgot. But yeah, absolutely, it's a fuckload, is what it is.
That was a ton. Even
He made
then.
$13,000 a year, which was $98,000 now, and so like that's
hundreds of thousands of
it's
dollars.
hundreds of thousands of 2018
That
dollars.
might be $500,000 actually.
Yeah,
Easily.
So here we go. So now he's in Arizona. He goes to Arizona, and he meets with the director of student placement at the state university to discuss recruiting a handful of young women to act as public relations reps for Pan Am, where he works. They would spend the summer traveling Europe, all expenses paid by the company, and would receive letters of employment that would grant them opportunity to work for the airline after graduation. Graduation. Frank manufactured Pan Am expense checks, which far exceeded the actual expenses for each of the 8 selected girls. He paid the bills and then pocketed the remainder. After the girls were flown back home, so they went on this trip, like eight young women accompanied Frank overseas, and they did like modeling excursions and like all of this crazy stuff, and just had a blast, just had the greatest summer of their lives.
I really need to reevaluate my life here.
Right? I think I'm in the
I
wrong
should just be
business.
a con artist instead of
I fucked up
earn
trying to
money
make an
the
honest
old-fashioned
living.
way.
So after the girls
Great.
were
Actually, now
flown,
we can't because now if someone hears this, and then we start
Right.
getting a lot of money,
This
it's going
sounds
to be
really
immediately
familiar.
fishy.
I think I heard it on a podcast.
Shit.
Yeah.
This can never get out.
We're deleting this episode.
Delete this. No,
So after the girls were flown back home, Frank had pocketed approximately $300,000, which in today's market
Oh my
is
God.
$2.2 million. So Frank now decided at the age of 20 to slow down his
Just
check
settle
fraud
down. I
game.
think I'm ready. I'm ready to start a life now.
He moved to Montpellier in France and began living a normal life. But the FBI was right on his heels. And just 4 months after settling down, Joseph Shea, who was the head of the FBI's investigative team tracking Frank, learned of Frank's location. He was arrested while shopping in a grocery store. Just wanted to throw that little detail in. He was just picking out some grapes or whatever, and they picked him up in a grocery store. So he's arrested, and 12 countries sought his extradition for crimes committed abroad. 12 different countries are like, you bring his ass here. But he wound up serving 6 months in a French prison and then 6 months in a Swedish prison before being extradited to the U.S., where he served 4 years of a 12-year sentence. 4 years.
So what's that in 2018 years?
That's about 18 weeks. So
Reverse inflation.
Right, your reverse inflation. So
Deflation? That's not, yeah.
In
Anyways.
1974, he was released from prison under the condition that he helped federal investigators to investigate fraud crimes, which he did, and he did that for many years, and now he owns a security consulting firm based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That is the story of the wonderful con artist and all-around American hero and role model, Frank Abagnale Jr.
Which I believe is the story that influenced the show White Collar.
I mean,
USA.
it sounds like
it's
for
almost
sure.
identical, honestly.
Yeah, it's a lot like White Collar, except for this really happened, and Frank Abagnale Jr. is not as good looking as Matt Bomer.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
Or Leo DiCaprio, for that matter.
well, I mean, honestly, in Frank Abagnale Jr.'s youth, like he was a good looking man, but
Which is probably why he got away with so many things.
absolutely
People was like,
I'm
oh,
sure.
he's attractive. Just,
hot
yeah,
people.
sure.
Yeah, if
They're
a hot
trustworthy.
person
They're really
walked
trustworthy.
up to me and punched me in the face, I'd be like,
Thank you. Yeah.
yeah.
You have to resist the urge to thank him.
Yeah. So yeah, that's Frank Abagnale Jr.
The man, the myth, the legend.
The man, the myth, the
What a
legend.
guy.
Yeah.
What a swell guy.
All right. Well, so that's my story. Alex, would you like to share what you have brought for
I
us?
would love to.
That is good. Because this would be a much shorter show otherwise.
Yeah.
I'm just actually ad-libbing it. So the story I brought with me today is kind of a special one that I almost hesitate to call this woman a con artist, but plot twist, she was lying all along.
Oh.
So, hence the theme of the show. But so, as many people may or may not know, there was a film in the 90s made by Disney under the name of Anastasia.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I always forget that was Disney.
No, me too. And actually, I
What a
remember until
coincidence.
I was looking this up. But anyway, so it's just this lighthearted film about this young woman who was the daughter of a Russian czar and back in the early 1900s, who survived a very tragic night and came back out of hiding to reclaim her throne or whatever. I haven't seen the movie in a long time.
Or
Yeah,
read the-
John Cusack sings in it.
Yeah.
And Christopher Lloyd's a villain. So
Right.
And there's that weird Rasputin guy.
that was Christopher Lloyd.
Yeah.
The stuff of nightmares back.
Yeah, just always nightmares. The man who was like the human cockroach who just wouldn't die.
Yeah.
Do a story on him instead.
Oh, Christopher Walken.
So
Christopher Lloyd, my bad.
it was all nice and
that
whatever.
out.
Ended nice, yada yada. But the real story is that I'm basically just going to kind of read through the fine website of Refinery 29, who I was a peruser of since about 2 days ago.
Nice. Yeah. Shout out to
Solid,
Refinery
solid
29.
plug there. You've made at least one new interaction. So
Please pay for my podcast. Anyways,
we're trying to get them to sponsor us as well. Refinery 29, George Clooney.
it's the whole reason I'm here.
The list keeps growing.
So, allow me, if you will, to lay the setting here. On July 17th, 1918, kind of toward the end of World War I, Russia was in the midst of, with the rest of the world, at the time referred to as the Great War, which we would later know as the First World War, World War I. And during this revolution, the Tsar at the time, Tsar Nicholas II, people didn't like him a whole lot, so
As is usually the case with monarchs.
as one does, him and his entire family was basically murdered one night in the basement, and
Oh, okay.
yeah, lovely stuff. They didn't show that part in the Disney film.
They did not. No.
It's almost like that was on purpose.
So
Think they let that on purpose?
Nah. Disney never
No
holds
way.
back.
There's no way.
So basically,
Disney Studios.
there was like, at the time, this like Black Ops group basically went in and like killed them and then buried the bodies where literally only the murderers knew at the time. Like, no one knew where they were. They couldn't even confirm if they actually died or not.
They just disappeared.
Yeah,
They just
weren't there, which I guess in the grand scheme of things is the same. Is the same thing.
Like the propaganda at the time, they pumped up like, yeah, they're dead, and they actually were. They died brutally, but so 2 years later, after this happens, there was this nameless woman who jumped off a bridge in Berlin, and pulled from the. I'm probably going to horribly butcher a lot of these names, by the way. Like,
I might be able to help. I took 3 years of German in high school.
So, pulled from the Landwehr Canal by police officers after her failed suicide attempt, Madame Unknown was soon brought to Daldorf Asylum with no papers in her pockets, no labels on her clothes, and a silent refusal to identify herself.
Is Madame Unknown the German version of Jane Doe?
Possibly.
I believe so.
Okay.
There she remained for 2 years. She said nothing at all for 6 months, though many took note of her aloof demeanor, the strange scars on her body, and the Russian accent that emerged when she did eventually speak. Meanwhile, European newspapers reported strange rumors out of Russia. One of the imperial daughters, it was said, had escaped the basement alive. They were all killed in the basement, by the way. I left that out of the prelude.
Callbacks.
So, it was another Daldorf patient, Clara Puthert, who was first suspected this aloof woman was the missing Romanov. Upon leaving the hospital, Puthert sought out high-ranking Russian expots, urging them to come and see the woman she believed was Grand Duchess Titania, the second oldest Romanov daughter. Puthert soon procured a handful of former Romanov friends and servants, all of whom were convinced on sight alone that this was the daughter of the late Tsar. The woman herself gave no encouragement. Sometimes she hid under the sheets in fear, seemingly terrified by any confrontation. Other times, she rebuffed her visitors, refusing to satisfy their queries, though she often seemed to recognize the people in the photos they thrust upon her. She would never say so until they were gone. Captain Nicholas
Wait, so who knew then that she recognized... If she never said that, oh, I recognize that person until they were gone...
So I like basically she wouldn't talk, and then she would like confide in like the other people there, and like this other
okay.
patient like, yeah, I knew who they were. Like the photos they were showing, I knew who they were.
Okay,
and, like,
so
the people
like
that came
the
in.
patients.
Yeah,
like,
the other
okay.
patient should be like, yeah, I knew them, but so Captain Nicholas von Schwabe,
Sure.
we'll go with that. A former personal guard to the Dowager Empress, Anastasia's grandmother, showed her old photos of the family. Watching this, she went red and increasingly upset, but refused to speak. Only later that night did she tell the nurses, that gentleman has a photo of my grandmother.
Okay.
So she never called herself a Romanov, nor did she deny it. The first objection came from Baroness Sophie Buxoheveden,
Yep.
a former lady-in-waiting to the Tsarina, who, upon seeing the mysterious patient, acknowledged the resemblance, but proclaimed her too short for Titania. For the first time, the woman replied, I never said I was Titania. Resistant though she was, the word began to spread. One day, Captain von Schwabe came again, knowing this time that pressuring the patient or even asking a direct question would get him nowhere. Instead, he offered a list of the Romanov daughters' names. If she couldn't say who she was, could she perhaps indicate who she wasn't? She crossed out all the names but one. Without saying a word, Madame Unknown became Anastasia, the 20th century's greatest royal riddle, never quite solved. The Berlin patient, who eventually took on the name Anna Anderson, was not the only Romanov claimant. Sorry. There were at least 4 other women who came forward as Anastasia, 7 men who claimed to be the Tsarevich Alexei, and a handful claiming themselves to be the Tsar's other daughters, Olga, Titania, and Maria. But it was the youngest daughter, Anastasia, around whom grew a cultish fascination. This was, in large part, thanks to Anderson, whose story spun off decades' worth of tabloid fodder, becoming the source of both the classic Ingrid Bergman film Anastasia and the 1997 animated feature of the same name, made by Disney. This advert for something else, but it would be a stretch to call adaptations based on a true story. The real tale of Anastasia and Anna Anderson is a far more twisted path, and the one that ends without a song, but only with dreadful silence and more blood. This is a lot more theatrical than I remember reading. After leaving
I like
the
the
hospital,
imagery, though, that it's painting
Right.
for me.
Exactly.
It's beautiful. It's setting the scene very well.
It's a work of art. After leaving the hospital, Anderson was sworn by those who wished to debunk or validate her as the lost Grand Duchess. In the twilight between wars, Europe was scattered with Romanov relations, former servants and friends, and many more Russian refugees. News of the royal family's murder had become public knowledge, and Soviet counterintelligence fueled the rumor that maybe, somehow, a child had survived. She was given housing by various supporters in distant Romanov relations, including Prince Valdemar of Denmark and Duke George of Leuchtenberg, while both police and private detectives sought the truth behind her unspoken story. She acknowledged herself as Anastasia within the small circle that she trusted, even though those few confidants were subject to her rage if they pushed the wrong button. Writer and journalist Peter Kurth published Anastasia, The Riddle of Anna Anderson in 1983, the seminal work of the Anderson case. More than anything, his exhaustive research reveals the mercurial nature of his subjects. For example, before she left Daldorf, the asylum that she was at, von Schwabe once brought Anderson a Bible into which he'd written the imperial family's password, a code used to indicate the person carrying it could be trusted. She had ripped the page out of the book and carefully torn it to bits, recounts Kurth. Tricks and persuasions were met with rage, as was sympathy if it seemed too much. Basically, she got away with all this by just being too angsty, and I was like, not going to question it.
That teenage angst, man. It was real even back in the beginning of the 20th century.
Longtime family friend Zina Tolstoy came to visit Anderson while she was staying at the home of the Russian emigres Baron and Baroness von Kleist. Careful not to prod, she made a small talk with the young woman, then sat at a piano, plinking at the keys. Do you play? Anderson, she said she'd had lessons as a child, but mostly she and her siblings preferred to dance. At this, Tolstoy eased into a waltz her brother had read, one that she'd often play for the Romanov children to dance to. The result was shattering, said Baroness von Kleist in Kurth's reporting of the scene. Anderson lost all composure, collapsing into sobs on the sofa. Tolstoy began to cry herself, asking if she recognized the music. Anderson admitted she did, and the two women wept together. But this open-arm reception was a rare exception to the rule, and when it came to the closest royal family relations, those who could have redeemed her in an instant, she was more than aloof. She was enraged. She also pretended to be very traumatized and upset about her past.
So she's prancing around like I'm Anastasia, the lost princess, but only to people who didn't know the lost princess. The royal family.
Yeah, people who weren't directly related or worked with them, because whenever those people got close, she would then freak out on them.
Like, nah, I'm not talking to you.
That's brilliant, though.
The only people who can refute your claim you refuse to see. So,
but
they're like, oh, it's okay. Your whole family died in front of you. I'm just gonna back off.
I'll go do a 60 Minutes interview, but only if none of the royal family is there.
Right. So,
can you imagine this would be an interesting episode, I think, of Dr. Phil? The lost princess claims to have survived family massacre.
So you survived a massacre. That can be traumatizing.
And then the crowd cheers.
Yeah.
So, Inspector Franz Grunberg, the first officer to investigate Anderson's identity, convinced Princess Irene of Prussia to meet Anderson at his home over dinner. Irene was the Tsarina's sister, Anastasia's aunt, and though surely she had hoped to find her niece was still alive, she'd thus far been reluctant to engage in the Anderson affair. When at last she did, the evening was an unqualified disaster. Irene arrived at Grunberg's home and was introduced to Anderson with a false name. There had been no warning of her arrival. The two were seated across from each other at the dinner table, enabling Irene to inspect her alleged niece closely. She hadn't seen the Romanovs for a decade, after all. Halfway through the meal, Anderson, furious, she got really angry, bolted from the table. Irene went after her, peppering her with questions, demanding, "Don't you know that I'm your Aunt Irene?" A tearful Anderson went silent once again. Irene left the inspector's home, saying that no, this was not Anastasia. Irene was apparently so upset by the meeting that she forbade anyone in her home to speak of Anastasia again. It was moments like this that galled Anderson supporters. Why was she so unhelpful, so rude? And she spat back, I was not rude. She was humiliated and bewildered, upset that her aunt had given her like a false name. She hadn't seen the woman since she was a child, and while she recognized the voice at first, it took her a moment before she realized who she was and what was going on. Her aunt was not here to welcome her as family, but to inspect her as an imposter. Why had these alleged friends set her up for such a dreadful exercise? For all that she could have gained, Anderson's own audacity and rancor made her the hostile witness in her own case. Indeed, it was only a matter of time before it went to trial.
I was
Honestly,
not rude, she said rudely.
She spat back. I am really impressed that she basically got away with this just by being
By being a dick.
a dick to everybody that asked
like
about it.
that's the opposite of my story, where he just charmed everybody, and then like Anna Anderson's over here like, fuck you, I'm a princess.
Speech level 100.
Yeah.
Intimidation level 100.
Yeah.
Oh, blew my mind. So for nearly a decade, Anderson bounced between castles and homes, dependent on the kindness of royal or wealthy strangers. The stream of visitors continued, and she had soon had as many detractors as supporters. Anastasia's old nursemaid, her former tutor, and her other royal employees flatly denied she was genuine, yet others still believed. In 1927, she met Gleb Botkin, son of Dr. Yevgeny Botkin.
Yeah.
Names are...
Well, they're very Russian.
I think I recognize the name, but I don't remember why. Botkin,
Interesting.
at least. The name Botkin, I think I recognize at least.
I have no
But I
idea.
don't know why. He might not actually be my doctor.
His father had been one of the few attendants allowed to accompany the imperial family when they were exiled to Ekaterinburg, and he was murdered in the basement along with them. When Gleb saw Anna, there was no question in his mind. When she mentioned the funny animals he used to draw in other games they played as children, his conviction only grew. He became Anderson's most ardent supporter, and when murmurs of the Romanov fortune grew, it was he who called a lawyer. In 1928, the burial location of the Russian royal family was known only to their murderers, and without a body, the Tsar's death could not be legally proven, but his estate, or what remained of it, could be claimed after 10 years. Then there was...
So, like, the massacre itself, like, was Anastasia meant to have been present for that then?
Yeah, so it was the Tsar, the Tsarina, his wife, and their 5 children were basically hiding in the basement when these intruders came in and started shooting at them.
And if I know anything about memory, it's that particularly traumatic events tend to stick with you.
Or be erased completely.
Or be erased completely. Sure.
Usually it's one or the other.
But I feel
there
like
isn't,
the
there's not a lot of
best
gray
litmus test they could have given was, where was your family hiding when they were murdered? And then just take us there. And then if she was like, you got me.
Well, I mean, honestly,
I'm not the princess.
I mean, honestly,
Bye,
would that
guys.
actually have been a way to prove that she was lying? Because no one really knew what happened to him at that time, did they?
By this point, you said
by
they,
this
It
point,
was literally only the people that actually pulled the trigger on them,
Yeah.
like, were the only ones that knew, and
right.
yeah.
which you said she was bouncing around for like a decade. How long was Frank Abagnale Jr. doing stuff before he got
6
caught?
years.
Just she was more successful than
Yes.
him.
Yeah, Anna Anderson already more successful.
Already more successful.
So, then there was the Tsarina Alexandra. As granddaughter of Queen Victoria and Princess of the House of Hesse, she too had many living relatives, including the British royal family, with an interest in what Nicholas and Alexandra had left behind. Gleb Botkin hired New York attorney Edward Fallows to prove that Anna Anderson was the Grand Duchess Anastasia, and thereby grant her all of the legal rights and, perhaps more important to the woman herself, recognition. Thus began the longest-running court case in German history to date.
Oh,
All right.
what a segue.
Aside from Princess Irene, Anastasia's closest relatives had kept a general distance from Anderson, but for the next 32 years they fought against her claim in court, yet their own deep pockets couldn't purchase proof one way or the other. Robert K. Massey, a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer and arguably the preeminent Romanov historian, wrote of the trial in the Romanovs: The Final Chapter. There he reports that in the 50s and 60s, a large body of medical and scientific evidence emerged, which to a surprising degree, supported Anna Anderson's claims. The same graphologist who identified Anne Frank's diary analyzed Anderson and Anastasia's handwriting, deeming it identical. She had a scar where Anastasia had a mole removed. Her feet bore similar bunions, and her face was examined by a renowned anthropologist and criminologist, Dr. Otto Reich. We'll go with that.
Reich.
Who concluded that such coincidence between two human faces is not possible unless they are the same person or identical twins.
What? So science has progressed a lot since then.
I'm amazed he came to this conclusion when she at this point would have been like over a decade older than when she was killed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what year was this happening in?
This was... Shit. I think this was like...
The third... Is it the 30s yet?
29,
Okay.
30, I believe. Yeah.
All right.
That's...
Wow.
The similarities between two human faces. It's impossible that she's anybody other than Anastasia. All right.
Cloning, as it turns out. Cloning. Yeah. So technically she's not Anastasia, but also technically she is.
Sure.
Yeah.
Schrodinger's princess.
I can't argue with that logic. So psychological evidence was overwhelmingly compelling as well. Dr. Lothar Nobel stated that no mental illness of any kind exists. It seems impossible that her knowledge of many small details is due to anything but her own personal experience. Furthermore, he added, it was inconceivable that an imposter should behave as the patient does now. All these conclusions were drawn by court-appointed experts, not paid for by either side. But the royals had one unavoidable piece of evidence in their favor. Franziska Szonskowska.
I can't wait until we have listeners in Russia, and then they
can tell us, like, you guys suck at
they
pronouncing
write in,
these.
and they're like, listen, this is not
this is
how
gonna
you
get bad.
pronounce any of our names. That's that's more Eastern
I can't wait
European.
for them to find my Twitter and ruin my life.
And then see, like the ultimate irony, I think, would be is like if they would like call in or write in complaining about our pronunciation and then immediately mispronounce your name or something like that.
My German last name.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Find a way to do it.
In 1927, a Berlin newspaper released an investigative report claiming to have discovered that Anna Anderson was actually Franziska Szonskowska, a Polish factory worker. Szonskowska, it said, had been declared insane after being injured in a factory explosion and had disappeared shortly before Madame Unknown turned up in Berlin. To her detractors, this seemed evidence enough. The timeline matched, and Szonskowska's brothers Felix signed an affidavit claiming that she looked exactly like his sister. But soon,
Which, remember, is scientifically impossible unless they're the same or identical twins.
But soon, details emerged that muddied the perfect picture painted by this discovery, for the newspaper had come to this information by coincidence. It was soon hadn't come to this information by coincidence. It was soon discovered that the Grand Duke of Hesse, Anastasia's uncle, who disbelieved Anderson, had paid the newspaper handsomely for the investigation. After this revelation, the theory evaporated until 1938, when Anna Anderson met with the Szonskowska family again. I feel like I'm pronouncing this differently every time I say it.
Well,
It's fine. Well, I mean, one of them is bound to be right? If you just go through all the possible pronunciations.
Inconsistency is the key.
Yeah, fuck you, Russia and Germany.
Inconsistency is key.
Do what I want.
America.
Again, they claimed to recognize her, and again the proof was complicated by circumstance. Nazi officials had arranged the meeting. Hitler evidently had an interest in Anderson's veracity, and also had not invaded Poland yet at this time.
Right? He's like, oh, it's a very interesting case.
I'm sure that's what Hitler sounded like.
He's sitting
Oh,
there
yes,
like,
it's very interesting
he's
case.
listening to it on the radio like, oh, Eva, come listen.
I think you're doing a little too much to humanize Hitler right now.
I know, right? He's like painting and listening.
Just watching the TV. Or radio at that point.
Yeah.
Listening to the radio. Watching the radio. Who knows? Hitler could have been doing a lot of things.
Go on.
So the Nazi officials, they were planning to arrest her if she proved a fraud. The Shanskowska family refused to sign the document claiming Anderson as their own. In 1970, the German Supreme Court finally ended the ruling case with a thud. Anna Anderson had neither been proven to be Anastasia, nor had she been proven not to be. Anna Anderson would spend the rest of her life in a staunch, unanswered riddle. How shall I tell you who I am? She asked in a 1978 interview. And which way can you tell me that? Can you really prove to me who you are? You can believe it, or you don't believe it. It doesn't matter.
That's like when Jaden Smith tweeted, "How can mirrors be real if our eyes aren't real?"
What?
That's what she said just then. It's Schrodinger's princess.
That's what I was just about to say. It's really Schrodinger's princess.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, 60 years later, she's
And like
not
the
wrong.
Supreme Court is the one saying that.
Yeah,
essentially.
so we still don't really know.
Well, the next sentence. 2 decades later, the truth would emerge in another hospital room, this time in Charlottesville, Virginia. But as ever, it was a truth that offered more questions than answers. In 1984, Anna Anderson, now living in the U.S. and married to a man who called her Anastasia, died of pneumonia. 7 years later, 5 skeletons were found in a forest near Ekaterinburg, where they all were murdered, by the way.
Okay.
As people who may or may not remember from earlier in the story.
Because a lot of things have happened.
A lot of
in this
names,
story.
not of places. Easy to forget.
Forget
some.
that this started with a grisly murder.
Yeah.
Soon identified those as the Tsar, Tsarina, and 3 of their children. Missing were the bodies of Tsarevich Alexis and 1 Grand Duchess. For a breathless moment, it seemed as if the century's greatest rumor had been true. All along, she had been a princess. Of course she had been. Those eyes, those stories, the horror of the bayonet scars on her body telling of what she had survived. And we had the audacity to doubt her. This is getting very dramatic again.
It is, yeah.
I just got some music. Da, 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 da.
Then came the DNA. Using blood from the British royal family, scientists confirmed the skeletons were those of the Romanovs. Using a small sample of intestine removed during a prior surgery, they concluded that Anna Anderson was probably not. In fact, she was probably a missing Polish factory worker by the name of Franziska Shanskowska.
I like that after all that, they're still like, just probably not. Not, definitely not. Just probably not.
We're pretty sure.
Probably not Russian royalty.
And basically the story closed out. In 2007, they found 2 more bodies nearby, and they were DNA confirmed as Alexis and Anastasia.
No, she definitely wasn't. Had she passed away by that point?
Oh yeah, I think she was long
by
dead.
2007 when they,
Okay, so here's the thing. When that Anastasia movie was made then,
They still thought
they
that she
still
was,
thought that maybe,
Anastasia had survived.
yeah,
Maybe that's why that movie went the way it did.
right? Probably.
Because I don't remember Anastasia dying in the movie. Spoilers to anyone who hasn't seen it yet.
It's been 20 years.
It's been
They're
20
fine.
years. There's people who
If
still
I
have...
was allowed to
It's been
spoil-
20 years. There's still people who haven't watched Star Wars.
If I was allowed to spoil Lonely Girl 15 on the last episode, then
It's a good thing I haven't listened to that episode yet. I have to go watch all 1,000 videos now.
I've actually been doing that. I went back through them.
No, yeah, because you're a psychopath.
Yeah, because that is crazy though.
That is
for a
the
hot
longest
second,
con, I think,
That's the
in
longest
human
con.
history.
As far as I'm aware, it is. Yeah.
in human history. Like
she just
a
like
solid
got to like travel around like
90 years.
hobnobbing like with dukes and duchesses living in castles.
Like, that con lasted
Literally.
longer than she did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
It did.
true. You're not wrong. All right.
Wow.
well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Man.
She even got her own Disney movie too.
Got her. She became a Disney princess, and she wasn't a princess.
Mike, would you like to share a story with us?
Sure.
What you got?
Bernard Lawrence Madoff
Oh boy.
was born on April 29th, 1938 in Queens, New York, to Jewish parents Ralph Madoff, a plumber and stockbroker, and Sylvia Muntner. Yeah, Bernie Madoff, pretty famous guy.
Right.
Most people know who Bernie Madoff is.
Our friends in the Netherlands might not.
Bernie Madoff, you'll find out very quickly who Bernie Madoff was today.
Just a lovely gentleman.
But first, we will start to get to know Bernie Madoff, the man, and not Bernie Madoff, the
monster.
Well, I
The
mean,
monster he became.
monster or most infamous fraudster in American history.
Yeah.
Depends. Like technically, he didn't. Well, never mind. Anyways, Madoff's grandparents were immigrants of Poland, Romania, and Austria. It's all connected. He is the second of 3 children. His siblings are Sandra Weiner and Peter Madoff. I assume it's pronounced Weiner. It's either that or Wiener. And
Yeah.
I wasn't.
She married a guy named Harry.
Yeah.
His last name.
Always go with the winner.
Anyways, Madoff graduated from Far Rockaway High School in 1958, and I did look up this high school to see if there were any notable alumni. None that I think would be considered household names, but I did see like 3 or 4 different Nobel Prize winners from this high school.
So prestigious.
Yeah,
high
so
school.
prestigious stuff. There was a sitting congressman, William F. Brunner was a sitting congressman. He went to this high school. Richard Feynman won a Nobel Prize in Physics in 1965 for his work on quantum electrodynamics.
Interestingly, it is all connected because Dr. Richard Feynman is all over Lonely Girl 15. Fun fact. It's all connected.
Yeah. And then Barrett Bloomberg was a Nobel Prize winner in medicine in 76, and a couple others. I won't go through all of them. His wife also went to the same high school, so there's a nice little
sweethearts.
So there's like it's like Bernie Madoff. He was really a person.
Maybe he ain't so bad after.
Yeah, maybe he ain't so
Married his
bad.
high school
Maybe he ain't so bad.
Perhaps he was just
anyways,
misunderstood.
Yes, he graduated in 1956, after which he attended the University of Alabama for 1 year, where he became a brother of the Tau chapter of Sigma Alpha Mu fraternity. Don't worry. Then transferred and graduated from Hofstra University in 1960 with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science. He briefly attended Brooklyn Law School, but left to instead found his Wall Street firm, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, LLC, and remained working there until his eventual demise. So he started up his company in 1960.
Okay.
And it lasted all the way until 2008. His firm started as a penny stock trader with $5,000, which is $41,000 in today money, that Madoff earned from working as a lifeguard and sprinkler installer. He further.
All right.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the thing is like he obviously came up with a decent work ethic, so that makes his what ultimately happens that more shocking, I think, from a human perspective at least.
And
He
he
further
no one
secured
saw coming.
he further secured a loan of $50,000 from his father-in-law, which he also used to set up Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, LLC. His business grew with the assistance of his father-in-law, accountant Saul Alpern, who referred a circle of friends and their families. Initially, the firm made markets via the National Quotation Bureau's pink sheets. In order to compete with firms that were members of the New York Stock Exchange trading on the stock exchange floor, his firm began to use innovative computer information technology to disseminate its quotes. After a trial run, that technology that the firm helped develop became the NASDAQ.
He invented the NASDAQ.
I did not know that.
The
Well,
firm
his
he owns. Well, I mean, yeah. So by extension, his firm created NASDAQ.
It's his grandkid, right? If the firm is his baby, then the NASDAQ is his
essentially,
baby's
yeah.
baby.
Essentially, yeah. So he did a big thing for the American economy.
Wow.
Yeah.
The firm functioned as a third market provider, bypassing exchange specialist firms by directly executing orders over the counter from retail brokers. At one point, Madoff Securities was the largest market maker at the NASDAQ, and in 2008 was the 6th largest market maker on Wall Street. Not just the NASDAQ, like all of Wall Street. The firm also had an investment management and advisory division, which it did not publicize. That was the focus of his inevitable fraud investigation.
All right.
Madoff was the first prominent practitioner of payment for order flow, in which a dealer pays a broker for the right to execute a customer's order. This has been called a legal kickback. Some academics have questioned the ethics of these payments, but Madoff has argued that these payments did not alter the price that the customer received, so he just considered them normal business practice. So he was active in the National Association of Securities Dealers, a self-regulatory securities industry organization, where he served as chairman of its board of directors and was a member of its board of governors. So that's just a little backstory on who Bernie Madoff is as the professional in his company, where it started. Now we will get into the meat of the story, because this gets pretty big.
He's lived long enough
to see himself become the villain.
Yeah.
All right. So jumping forward a good deal.
Should have just killed himself when he had the chance.
Right.
We are now in 1999. Where financial analyst Harry Markopolos had informed the SEC that he believed it was legally and mathematically impossible to achieve the gains that Bernie Madoff had claimed to deliver. According to Markopolos, it took him 4 minutes to conclude that Madoff's numbers did not add up, and another minute to suspect that they were likely fraudulent. After 4 hours of failed attempts to replicate Madoff's numbers, Markopolos believed that he had mathematically proved Madoff was a fraud. However, he was ignored by the SEC's Boston office in 2000 and in 2001, as well as Megan Chung at the SEC's New York office in 2005 and 2007, after he had presented further evidence.
Nah, we like Bernie. He's a nice guy.
Yeah.
He's not doing anything wrong.
He has since co-authored a book.
Where you came from.
Yeah, so he has since co-authored a book with the leader of his legal team titled "No One Would Listen." The book details the frustrating efforts he and his legal team made over a 10-year period to alert the government, the industry, and the press about Madoff's fraud.
And nobody bought it.
Nobody. Let's click on the book and see how well it sold.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Because if nobody bought it, that would be even funnier to
Right,
me.
nobody listened.
Reception. The book provided a really insightful look into the world of high finance and the best explanation of the Madoff fraud, but found that it had too much about Markopolos himself, his family, and his friends. Publishers Weekly called it an astonishing true-life whodunit, with the repercussions of Madoff's downfall serving as a satisfying conclusion. LexisNexis, however, faulted Markopolos for being overly critical of the SEC, and at the Wall Street Journal, Richard Toffel, while conceding the quality of Markopolos' investigative work, stated that by describing his own fears of retribution from organized crime, Markopolos sheds more light than he intends to on just why no one would listen. I see nothing about sales on here, though, so who knows? Maybe it didn't sell.
We'll just assume it didn't.
So, people read it.
A couple people, at least. 3 people, at the very least, read that book. Okay. Although Madoff's wealth management business ultimately grew into a multi-billion-dollar operation, none of the major derivatives firms traded with him because they did not believe his numbers were real. None of the major Wall Street firms invested with him, and several high-ranking executives at those firms suspected his operations and claims were not legitimate. Others contended it was inconceivable that the growing volume of Madoff's accounts could be competently and legitimately serviced by his documented accounting/auditing firm, a 3-person firm with only 1 active accountant. So around the same time, it appears that the rest of the industry was starting to be highly suspicious of his practices as well.
No one would listen, but everyone was suspicious.
No one's going to listen to it's like the Hollywood thing now. It's like everyone knows, but no one says anything kind of thing.
That's true.
So I wonder if
nobody's blowing the whistle.
Yeah. So are these other
Madoff.
companies have something to hide then? Anyways, no. I just put a target on my back. The Central Bank of Ireland failed to spot Madoff's gigantic fraud when he started using Irish funds and had to supply large amounts of information, which would have been enough to enable Irish regulators to uncover the fraud much earlier than late 2007 when he was finally arrested in New York. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI for you kids at home, report and federal prosecutors' complaint says that during the first week of December of 2008, Madoff confided to a senior employee identified by Bloomberg News as one of his sons that he said he was struggling to meet the $7 billion in redemptions. For years, Madoff had simply deposited investors' money in his business account at J.P. Morgan Chase and withdrew money from that account when they requested redemptions. He had scraped together just enough money to make a redemption payment on November 19th. However, despite getting cash infusions from several longtime investors, by the week after Thanksgiving, it was apparent that there was not enough money to even begin to meet the remaining requests. His Chase account had over $5.5 billion in mid-2008, but by late November was down to $234 million. Only $234 million,
Oh,
guys.
man,
he's
he's
really
down to his last couple
He's
hundred
really
million.
struggling there. He's really struggling.
Hey, listen, when you live the lifestyle that Bernie Madoff was living, when you're down to your last couple $100 million, you're scraping.
Yeah. Well, that is important, though, because that $234 million was not even a fraction of the outstanding redemptions that he had to pay.
Right.
On December 3rd, he told longtime assistant Frank Abagnale, who had overseen the fraudulent advisory business, that he was finished. On December 9th, he told his brother about the fraud. According to the Suns, Madoff told Mark Madoff on the following day, December 9th, that he had planned to pay out $173 million in bonuses 2 months early. Madoff said that he had recently made profits through business operations, and now was a good time to distribute it. Mark told Andrew Madoff, his other son, and the next morning they went to their father's office and asked him how he could pay bonuses to his staff if he was having trouble paying clients. They then traveled to Madoff's apartment, where with Ruth Madoff, his wife, nearby, Madoff told them that he was finished, that he had absolutely nothing left, and that his investment fund was just one big lie, and basically a giant Ponzi scheme. Which, for anyone who doesn't know what a Ponzi scheme is, in short, it's basically just a fraud scheme in which a victim is tricked into investing in a company that does not actually do business. So basically...
So did he set up the whole company with this plan in mind, or did he set it up and then he was like, oh man, I could totally, scam a bunch of people out of money?
We will get to details on that later.
Because if he set up the company, that's a 47-year con.
Yeah, we will get to that part later.
Jesus Christ.
More details on that to come. So yeah, basically, a Ponzi scheme is just tricking people into investing into a company that doesn't actually exist.
Okay.
And then you just pocket the money.
Yeah.
Because obviously, since the company doesn't exist and it's not doing anything like that, there's not going to be any payouts for the investors because it's not generating income. According to their attorney, Madoff's sons then reported their father to federal authorities. So, his fiance reports Frank Abagnale Jr., his sons report Bernie Madoff. I guess it turns out that there is, that even close bonds is, paternal bonds, still not good enough to overlook massive amounts of fraud.
I'm sorry, how much money is $7 billion? What he was in the hole?
It was more than that. We will get to the actual numbers later.
Christ.
Sorry, Dad. Justice never sleeps.
Justice never sleeps.
You can't escape the long arm of the law, Dad.
Crime doesn't pay.
You live too long, Dad.
$7 billion. All right. Madoff had intended to wind up his operations over the remainder of the week before having his sons turn him in. He directed Abagnale to use the remaining money in the business account to cash out the accounts of several family members and favored friends. However, as soon as they left their father's apartment, Mark and Andrew immediately contacted a lawyer who in turn got them in touch with federal prosecutors and the SEC. On December 11th, Madoff was arrested and charged with securities fraud. Madoff posted $10 million bail in 2008 and remained under 24-hour monitoring and house arrest in his Upper East Side penthouse apartment until March 12th, 2009. Which honestly, there's worse ways to live. I
What
suppose.
a shithole.
He's really
Other than the impending incarceration that he was facing, there's certainly worse ways to live. So he was under house arrest until March 12th, 2009, when Judge Denny Chin revoked his bail and remanded him into the Metropolitan Correctional Center. Chin ruled that Madoff was a high flight risk because of his age, his wealth, and his prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison, which at that point wasn't a lot.
About
but
3 or 4 years.
But I guess, still, when someone's got that much money, even if the rest of your life in prison is 2 years, you don't necessarily want to spend the last 2 years of your life in prison. So
these are the sunset years. I'm supposed to be living in Florida. Retired.
Yeah. So at that point, he definitely was a huge risk to bounce. So
time for Bernie to
he's like,
head over to
no
San
more house
Junipero.
arrest in your cushy Upper East Side apartment penthouse. You're going to prison. Prosecutors filed 2 asset forfeiture pleadings, which include lists of valuable real and personal property, as well as financial interests in entities owned or controlled by Madoff. Madoff's lawyer, Iris Sorkin, filed an appeal, which prosecutors opposed. On March 20th, 2009, an appellate court denied Madoff's request to be released from jail and returned to home confinement until his sentencing on June 29th, 2009. On June 22nd, 2009, Sorkin hand-delivered a customary pre-sentencing letter to the judge requesting a sentence of 12 years because of the tables from the Social Security Administration that his lifespan was predicted to be 13 years. He's like,
hey, you'll get out of prison and you'll get 1 year left.
I know that I stole, like, a lot of money. But can I just go to prison for 12 years because I'm probably going to be alive for 13?
Right.
I want to spend that last year of my life not in prison.
What if I go to jail for 20 years, but I get weekends off?
I get weekends off.
I see no
what about
problem
holidays? Can we work out something holidays?
Just Thanksgiving, 4th of July, and Christmas. That's all.
By the way, I've got this company that I think you would be great to invest in. On June 26th...
Low risk, high yield.
Like, the sky's the limit. All right. On June 26th, 2009, Chin ordered forfeiture of $170 million in Madoff's assets. Prosecutors asked Chen to sentence Madoff's to 150 years in prison, getting out at the ripe old age of 221.
Hey, he's got a couple good years
He'll
left.
be eligible for parole at about
by the time he
around
gets out of
165.
prison. By the time he gets out of prison, we will have actual San Junipero, and he'll get to get uploaded to the cloud. But like it gets uploaded, but then he's just in a jail cell.
He'll probably get out early at like 165 or something like that.
Okay.
So like,
good behavior counts for something.
75. 75 years, half the sentence usually, right? Half your sentence is when you get available for parole. So yeah.
I love it.
Bankruptcy trustee Irving Picard indicated that Mr. Madoff has not provided meaningful cooperation or assistance. In a settlement with federal prosecutors, Madoff's wife Ruth agreed to forfeit her claim to $85 million in assets, leaving her with $2.5 million in cash. The order allowed SEC and court-appointed trustee Irving Picard to pursue Ruth Madoff's funds. Massachusetts regulators also accused her of withdrawing $15 million from company-related accounts shortly before he confessed, implying that she was complicit in the scheme to begin with.
Okay.
In February 2009, Madoff reached an agreement with the SEC. It was later revealed that as part of the agreement, Madoff accepted a lifetime ban from the securities industry.
I mean, you can't be in securities anymore, and he's like, that's fair.
That's fair. I accept this. That seems like a worthy trade-off. I don't think we need to pursue this any further.
By the way, I've got this company I think I should invest in.
Also, my bad. I didn't know that was frowned upon.
Now I do.
Now I do.
I won't do it anymore.
I think I have grown as a person because of these events. And yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's about it. All right, let's go on our merry way and let's agree this never happened.
Okay, so Lady Madoff might be complicit.
Might be complicit. I don't have any confirmation on that at this point. But after all, this story is about Bernie Madoff and not Ruth. So, not important. All right, so eventually Picard sued Madoff's sons, Mark and Andrew, his brother Peter, and Peter's daughter Shanna for negligence and breach of fiduciary duty for $198 million. The defendants had received over $80 million in compensation since 2001. So the mechanics of the fraud, in case anyone was wondering just how this all went down, how he was able to trick so much money out of so many people, because I haven't even given you the final number on how much money he tricked out of people.
So is it like the Office Space thing where like, oh, every transaction has got those fractions of a penny, and usually it just rounds them off. But instead what we do is
so it's not stealing. We just take fractions of pennies. Are they your pennies? No. So it's stealing. So according to the SEC indictment against Annette Bongiorno and Joanne Krupi, two back office workers who worked for Madoff, they created false trading reports based on the returns that Madoff ordered for each customer. For example, when Madoff determined a customer's return, one of the back office workers would enter a false trade report with a previous date and then enter a false closing trade in the amount required to produce the required profit, according to the indictment. Prosecutors allege that Bongiorno used a computer program specially designed to backdate trades and manipulate account statements. They quote her as writing to a manager in the early 1990s, "I need the ability to give any settlement date I want." In some cases, returns were allegedly determined before the account was even opened. On a daily basis, DePascali and his team on the 17th floor of the Lipstick Building, where the scam was based, Madoff's brokerage was based on the 19th floor, while the main entrance and conference room were on the 18th floor, in case anyone wants to know the general layout of the building.
Right.
Or at least those three floors. I don't know what's on I don't know what's on the first through 16th floor, but anyways. They then picked the best performing stocks and used them to create bogus baskets of stocks as the basis for false trading records, which Madoff claimed were generated from his supposed split strike conversion strategy, in which he bought blue chip stocks and took option contracts on them. They frequently made their trades at a stock's monthly high or low, resulting in the high returns that they touted to customers. On occasion, they slipped up and dated trades as taking place on weekends and federal holidays, though no one caught on to that.
Why would they?
Yeah.
It's not like anybody's reading every report.
It's like they
Nothing to see here.
for the amount of time they were doing this. If they were accidentally marking things as weekends and federal holidays, they gave authorities and people ample time to catch them.
Yeah.
And no one ever did. Over the years, Madoff admonished his investors to keep quiet about their relationship with him. This was because he was well aware of the finite limits that existed for a legitimate split strike conversion. He knew that if the amount he managed became known, investors would question whether he could trade on the scale he claimed without the market reacting to his activity, or whether there were enough options to hedge his stock purchases. Indeed, at least as early as 2001, Harry Markopolos discovered that for Madoff's strategy to be legitimate, he would have to buy more options on the Chicago Board Options Exchange than actually existed. Additionally, at least one hedge fund manager revealed that she balked at investing with Madoff because she didn't believe there was enough volume to support his purported trading activity. Madoff admitted during his March 2009 guilty plea that the essence of his scheme was to deposit client money into a Chase account rather than invest it and generate steady returns as clients had believed. When clients wanted their money, he said, "I used the money in the Chase Manhattan bank account that belonged to them or other clients to pay the requested funds," he tells the court. Madoff maintained that he began his fraud as early as the 1990s, which would mean he still was operating this for nearly 20 years.
Yeah.
But prosecutors believed it was underway as early as the 80s, making it a 30-year endeavor.
Jeez.
DePascali, for instance, told prosecutors that he knew the investment advisory business was a sham from some point in the late 80s or early 90s. However, an investigator charged, but this was never corroborated, an investigator charged with reconstructing Madoff's scheme believes that the fraud was well underway as early as 1964.
All right.
That was never confirmed. That is still just held as a belief. But if true, it basically means his company was always a fraud scheme.
He was like...
He had
I
operated
got this great
legitimately
idea for a company.
It means
what
he would
It's really a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, it would have meant that he operated legitimately for 4 years, and then everything
good
after
on
that was. He's like, I've been at this company for 4 years. This is hard.
Yeah.
How do I make more money?
It's a lot easier to just lie, cheat, and steal.
Yeah.
It's what we in the biz call the long con.
Yeah. I bet this will pay off by at least 2008 or 2009. Like, really well. I'll be settled.
My kids are going to be set.
I'll enjoy that last year of life. Yeah. Real nice.
Yeah, so Madoff maintained reportedly Madoff had told an acquaintance soon after his arrest that the fraud began almost immediately after his firm opened its doors. Again, just rumor, though, because not confirmed story. Bongiorno, who spent over 40 years with Madoff, told investigators that she was doing the same things she was doing in 2008 that she did when she first joined the firm. Also implying that the scam had been running for over 40 years.
Jesus.
Damn.
So, Madoff targeted wealthy American Jewish communities using his in-group status to obtain investments from Jewish individuals and institutions because, if you remember and we're taking notes, he's Jewish.
Yeah.
Affected Jewish charitable organizations considered victims of his affinity fraud include Hadassah, the Women's Zionist Organization of America, the Elie Wiesel Foundation, and Steven Spielberg's Wunderkinder Foundation. Jewish federations and hospitals lost millions of dollars, forcing some organizations to close. The Lapin Foundation, for instance, was forced to close temporarily because it had invested its funds with Madoff. Now we'll move on to the size of loss to investors. David Sheehan, chief counsel to Trustee Picard, stated on September 27th, 2009, that about $36 billion was invested into the scam, returning $18 billion to investors, with $18 billion missing. About half of Madoff's investors were net winners, earning more than their investment. The withdrawal amounts in the final 6 years were subject to clawback, return of money lawsuits. In a May 4th, 2011 statement, Trustee Picard said that the total fictitious amounts owed to customers with some adjustments were $57 billion,
Jesus
of which
Christ.
$17.3 billion was
God.
actually invested. $7.6 billion has been recovered, but pending lawsuits, only $2.6 billion is available to repay victims. If all the recovered funds are returned to victims, their net loss would be under $10 billion. The Internal Revenue Service, IRS to the kids at home, ruled that investors' capital losses in this and other fraudulent investment schemes will be treated as business losses, thereby allowing the victims to claim them as net operating losses to reduce tax liability more easily. So, in a strange turn of events, the IRS is making it easier on someone on their taxes.
Well, that's nice.
I don't buy it for a second.
Yeah, they're winning somehow in the long run.
The size of the fraud was stated early in the investigation as $65 billion. Former SEC Chairman Harvey Pitt estimated the actual net fraud to be somewhere between 10 and 17 billion. One difference between the estimates concerns the method of calculation. One method calculates losses as the total amount that victims thought they were owed but will never receive. The smaller estimate uses a different method, subtracting the total cash received from the scheme from the total cash paid into the scheme, after excluding from the calculation persons accused of collaborating with the scheme. Persons who invested through feeder funds, and anyone who received more cash from the scheme than they paid in. Aaron Arvidlund, who publicly questioned Madoff's reported investment performance in 2001, stated that the actual amount of the fraud might never be known, but was likely between 12 and $20 billion. Jeffrey Picower, rather than Madoff, appears to have been the largest beneficiary of Madoff's Ponzi schemes, and his estate settled the claims against it for $7.2 billion. Entities and individuals affiliated with Fred Wilpon and Saul Katz received $300 million in respect of investments in the scheme. Wilpon and Katz categorically rejected the charge that they ignored warning signs about Madoff's fraud. On November 9th, 2017, the U.S. government announced that it would begin paying out $772.5 million to more than 24,000 victims of the Ponzi scheme.
That was just, 8 months ago?
Yeah, this is just very recently. So the plea, sentencing, and prison life. On March 12th, 2009, Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies, including securities fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, making false statements, perjury, theft from an employee benefit plan, and making false filings at the SEC.
Jesus.
The plea was the
slap on the
response
wrist.
to a criminal complaint filed 2 days earlier, which stated that over the past 20 years, Madoff had defrauded his clients of almost $65 billion in the largest Ponzi scheme in history. Madoff insisted he was solely responsible for the fraud. Madoff did not plea bargain with the government. Rather, he pled guilty to all charges. It has been speculated that Madoff pleaded guilty instead of cooperating with the authorities in order to avoid naming any associates and co-conspirators who were involved with him in the scheme. In November 2009, David G. Freeling, Madoff's accounting frontman and auditor, pleaded guilty to securities fraud, investment advisor fraud, making false filings to the SEC, and obstructing the IRS. He admitted to merely rubber stamping Madoff's filings rather than auditing them. Freeling extensively cooperated with federal prosecutors and testified at the trials of 5 former Madoff employees, all of whom were convicted and sentenced between 2.5 and 10 years in prison. Although he could have been sentenced to more than 100 years in prison because of his cooperation, Freeling was sentenced in May 2015 to 1 year of home detention and 1 year of supervised release. His involvement made the Madoff scheme by far the largest accounting fraud in history. Madoff's right-hand man and financial chief, Frank Abagnale, pleaded guilty to 10 federal charges in 2009 and, like Freeling, testified for the government at the trial of 5 former colleagues, all of whom were convicted. Abagnale faced a sentence of up to 125 years, but he died of lung cancer in May of 2015 before he could be sentenced. In his plea allocution, Madoff stated that he began his Ponzi scheme in 1991, so that is the official start. Though other people obviously...
According to the guy
who
lied for 40 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, if you look at it this way, it's like, I already stole $65 billion. What's it matter? Like, why would I lie about when I stole $65 billion?
Well, because maybe the $65 billion
would carry a
could
steeper
only
charge.
be... Well, no. Like, I'm thinking, what if that's all that can be traced back to 1991, and he did more work
that he just forgot about.
Right, and then like
It's like, that was a lot of numbers.
From 1960
to
to 91,
then.
right? God, that's crazy.
So he admitted that he had never made any legitimate investments with the client's money during the time. Instead, he said he simply deposited the money into his personal business account at the Chase Manhattan Bank. When his customers asked for withdrawals, he paid them out of the Chase account, a classic robbing Peter to pay Paul scenario. Chase and his successor, J.P. Morgan Chase, may have earned as much as $483 million from his bank account. He was committed to falsifying his clients' expectations of high returns despite an economic recession. He admitted to false trading activities marked by foreign transfers and false SEC filings. He stated that he always intended to resume legitimate trading activity, but it proved difficult and ultimately impossible to reconcile his client accounts. In the end, Madoff said he realized that his scam would eventually be exposed. As clearly it was. On June 29th, 2009, Judge Chin sentenced Madoff to the maximum sentence of 150 years in federal prison. Madoff's lawyers initially asked the judge to impose a sentence of 7 years and later requested that the sentence be 12 years because of Madoff's advanced age of 71 and his limited life expectancy. Madoff apologized to his victims, saying, "I have left a legacy of shame, as some of my victims have pointed out, to my family and my grandchildren. This is something I will live with for the rest of my life. 13 years. I'm sorry." He added, "I know that doesn't help you," after his victims recommended to the judge that he receive a life sentence. Judge Chin had not received any mitigating factors letters from friends or family testifying to Madoff's good deeds. The absence of such support is telling, he said. Judge Chin also said that Madoff had not been forthcoming about his crimes. "I have a sense Mr. Madoff has not done all that he could do or told all that he knows," said Chin, calling the fraud extraordinarily evil, unprecedented, and staggering, and that the sentence would deter others from committing similar frauds. Judge Chin also agreed that prosecutors' contention that the fraud began at some point in the 1980s. He also noted that Madoff's crimes were off the charts, since federal sentencing guidelines for fraud only go up to $400 million in losses. So, like, prior to this, there was no actual way to prosecute anyone, or, like, there was not, like, as far as sentencing guidelines go, like he basically had to make this up as he went because there had not been actually guidelines for how to prosecute someone who has stolen more than $400 million from people.
Jesus
Wow.
Christ.
And he possibly stole $65 billion.
My God.
Ruth did not attend court, but issued a statement saying, "I am breaking my silence now because my reluctance to speak has been interpreted as indifference or lack of sympathy for the victims of my husband Bernie's crime, which is exactly the opposite of the truth. I am embarrassed and ashamed. Like everyone else, I feel betrayed and confused. The man who committed this horrible fraud is not the man whom I have known for all these years." So yeah, he's in jail now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that was the story of the largest case of fraud in human history.
Jesus Christ. I remember when this story was happening.
Yeah.
Like, when it was coming to light, all of the damage that Bernie had done. Like, but I did not really register the scope of it.
I don't know it was like that much money.
That is an unfathomable amount of money.
Yeah, it wasn't until I started earning money and having to spend money that I really appreciated how much money that is.
Yeah. That is utterly absurd.
And the worst part about that to me is, like, he didn't do anything really clever.
No.
He just took it and put it into a different bank account. That's all it was. And he got away with that, allegedly, for over 40 years.
That's...
Like, at least... Your story was like, this guy was being clever.
Yeah.
And she was like, I'm able to convince people by being a little bit crazy and everything like that. He didn't do anything
He was
special.
just like, cool, thanks for the money.
He just straight up tricked people. That's all it was. There was no finesse to it.
Not even really tricking people. He was like,
well, he
want
made
to
them believe
invest in
they
something?
were
And they're like,
investing.
yeah. And he's like, give me money, I'll invest it for you.
That's tricking. Though. Like, I mean, he tricked people.
He invested it in.
He made people believe they were
Bernie
investing
Madoff,
something.
J.P. Morgan Chase account.
That's true, I guess. The Get Bernie Madoff 10,000 Yachts fund, I guess. It was just an absurd amount of money.
Yeah. An obscene amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
That's fucking ridiculous.
It is. It is.
All right, well.
I feel better about myself now, guys, I think.
You know, I do too. I've never stolen that much money.
Well, feels slightly vindicated here.
Well, thank you guys both for being on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Listeners, you can always check out Alex Stern on his podcast Hush Chat, which is available iTunes, SoundCloud.
Our preferred app is Radio Public because we get paid through that one. But
heck yeah!
If you don't like giving us money,
Hush
then
Chat on Radio Public.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the subtle hint and clue that I was getting out of that as well. It's like, just go to this one. Don't worry with the other ones. Just go to this one.
Of course, listeners, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, make sure you're leaving us a review or a rating or whatever. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Don't follow us in real life. That's creepy, but you can follow us on the internet. I've been doing this really cool thing with the Instagram. I think it's cool. It might be really lame, but every episode I've been doing like 3 pictures of like just a sneak peek, no context other than
the no context
hashtag.
Infinity War spoilers.
Yeah, it's like got the hashtag with the name of the episode and like, just little sneak peeks. So like, like it was just a picture of Steve Buscemi on there. And, like, there's a picture of like, there's a picture of a mattress firm on there. It's like, yeah, it's just
nice
sneak peeks. But anyway, thank you so much for listening to Anti-Fiction. We'll see you next week.